Great to have you along for the ride. Thanks a lot for stopping by. Glad to have this man back. The Article 3 Project founder and president. Go to article3project.org. It's Mike Davis. Mike, how are you?
I'm doing well, and thank you for having me back on.
You're very welcome. Before I get into the details of what's being thrown out, what did Jack Smith latest do? What's Fannie Fawny doing? Before we do any of that, when these cases were all brought against Trump, you were one of the loudest and first voices to say it's lawfare, it's all BS. You've been proven right just about 100% of the time because some of the cases aren't over yet. But when you saw that happen, I think you and I spoke about it. Was it your feeling that this was just to push him out of the race, or do you think they really thought they had something on him?
I think it was purely lawfare and election interference. These are all bogus charges. It is not a crime for a president to have his presidential records. That is allowed under the Presidential Records Act. It is not a crime to object to a presidential election. That is allowed by the Electoral Count Act of 1887, and it is certainly not a crime for a businessman to settle a nuisance claim and put it in his private books as a legal expense. This happens every day in America, all across America. If that were a crime, I would be in prison as an attorney for aiding and abetting paying nuisance claims.
Listen, I couldn't agree more. What do you make of the media freaking out, right? They're all freaking out. And every time they have an opportunity, they're asking anybody who's got an R under his or her name about questioning the election and will there be a peaceful transfer of power. They're trying to circle back to pretend Donald Trump tried to overthrow the government and not leave office, which didn't happen, obviously. But what do you make of them going back to that? Do you think that's emotional enough that people in America who are on the fence might say, I can't vote for him, he tried to steal the election?
I think Americans, after 3.5 years of Kamala Harris as the border czar, where she let in 20 million illegal immigrants, including fighting-age men from the most vicious countries in the world, including these Venezuelan gangs that are overtaking apartment buildings.
Only a handful, though. Mike, only a handful. Not a big deal. It's only a handful of apartment complexes are taken over by violent Venezuelan drug gangs. Not a big deal. Ask Martha Raddatz.
Yeah, I mean, let's just send 50 of these Venezuelans to Martha's Vineyard like Florida Governor Ron DeSantis did, and they called in the freaking military and have them deported. Now, these rich white liberals in Martha's Vineyard, they did have a Thanksgiving meal before they had the military come fetch.
God bless them. And by the way, the sheriff where I live in Bexar County, Texas, is trying to charge Ron DeSantis for lying to people and sending them to Martha's Vineyard. You can't make this up, can you, Mike?
It's just rich. I mean, Kamala Harris is the border czar who's let in 20 million illegal immigrants, violent criminals, killers, murderers, rapists, pedophiles. They're overwhelming our schools, our hospitals, our social services. They sent 20,000 Haitians to Springfield, Missouri, a town of 60,000 people. And then they want to say that these people who are already struggling in Springfield are somehow racist and xenophobe because they don't want 20,000 people overtaking their town. It's just sick. This is the Kamala Harris who was the tie-breaking vote in the Senate as the vice president for the two key votes on Bidenomics that destroyed our economy, made interest rates and inflation spike where they're out of control, crushing American families. Those are the issues that the American people care about, not whether Hornman made it to the Senate floor on January 6th.
Hornman is the guy's name, I believe. It's Springfield, Ohio. You said Missouri, but of course you know that it's Ohio. You're right. All of what you said is absolutely spot on. So let's get into these cases. Like you, I can't stop working. So when I get off my show, I'll eat a little dinner, watch a little TV, and then go live stream somewhere. And in the live streams, one of the biggest questions that's been asked of me for the past week, did they throw out the Letitia James case, the fraud case against Donald Trump? And Mike, you and I have been watching these appellate court justices or judges in New York. And as far as, look, they lean left. They do. But they are spot on with these questions for the prosecution. Is that case over? Did they throw it out?
It's a very good question. This is so how it works in New York. There's the New York Supreme Court, which is their lowest court, their trial courts.
Yes.
Then they have the appellate division where this case is right now. Then they have the New York Court of Appeals, which is their state Supreme Court. These are all Democrat judges. This is a Democrat-dominated judiciary. And what Tish James did in this New York trial in front of Arthur Engoron on this fraud case for the non-fraud of paying back sophisticated Wall Street banks on on time, in full, as agreed with interest. Somehow
Yes.
that's fraud is just absolutely insane. They took a New York statute intended for persistent fraud against the New York public and tried to misapply it, contort it, politicize it, and weaponize it to go after Trump, their political enemy. I mean, I'm actually shocked that the appellate division may actually deliver justice here because I don't expect that from New York. It's a Democrat hellhole.
And you and I have talked about this. They lean left as well. Not as bad as the so-called Supreme Court, but this is the top court in the state of New York. And the questions have been exactly what you've been saying for months and months now, Mike. The question is, who is the aggrieved party? How has any attorney general or any prosecutor in New York ever used this statute in this way? And they have no answers. And at the end of it, it appeared to be, and tell me if I got this wrong, Letitia James's people are almost begging to not be sanctioned because of what they did here. Did I misread that?
I think that you're spot on, Joe. And what needs to happen, and I keep talking about this, and I actually mean this, there's no trolling here. The Trump 47 Justice Department, the acting attorney general on day one, must open a criminal probe on this blatant and obvious criminal conspiracy against rights under 18 USC section 241. One of the charges that Jack Smith brought against Trump in the January 6th case in D.C. because these Democrats at every level, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Merrick Garland, Jack Smith, Jay Bratz, Lisa Monaco, Tish James, Fani Willis, Nathan Wade, these Democrat prosecutors and these Democrat hellholes have politicized and weaponized our justice systems to go after Trump, his top aides like Steve Bannon, who's sitting in prison right now, Peter Navarro, who went to prison, his attorneys, John Eastman, Jeffrey
Right.
Clark, Rudy Giuliani, his supporters on January 6th, who were persecuted, yes, politically persecuted per the Supreme Court's June Fisher ruling. This is a criminal conspiracy against rights, and there must be accountability for this because this is what happens in third world Marxist hellholes. This is how republics die, and there must be consequences, severe legal, political, and financial consequences for this grotesque miscarriage of justice.
Follow him on X, on Truth as well, MRDDMIA. Also go to article3project.org. It's Mike Davis. Mike, before we move on from Letitia James, it's not thrown out yet, but it looks like it will be. So that $450 million decision that she tried to steal his businesses. She said, we're going to take his businesses. She actually ran to do that. Okay, that gets thrown out. Can Trump now sue the state of New York like crazy or not?
He should try, and he should do it under the federal civil rights statute. There's both a criminal component and there is a civil component because you can't have government actors, including they can't conspire amongst other government actors or with private citizens to deprive Americans of their constitutional rights, their civil rights, and that's exactly what this lawfare is against President Trump. It's lawfare. It's election interference. It is blatantly illegal under our federal civil rights, civil and criminal statutes, and there must be severe consequences for this.
Yeah, it's Mike Davis. I talked to Will Scharf, Alina Habba, and you about this ad nauseum, but I think people want to hear it again. Donald Trump is not a convicted felon right now. There has not been final justice. This judge, Merchan, who knows what he's going to do after the election. What happens with that case? Can that be thrown out before he gets to so-called final justice? And I'm right legally that he's not a convicted felon, right?
Well, under a normal system, he should not be a convicted felon because what happens all across the country is the jury finds guilt and the judge has to separately convict and sentence. Now, under New York law, they've tried to change that and say that when the jury finds guilt, that is a conviction almost all the time, but that can't be constitutional because that takes judicial power away from judges and gives that judicial power to the jury, which is not constitutional under our system. But I would say this, that case should be thrown out in New York City on many different grounds. No due process, no fair notice, no real crimes, statute of limitations, just on and on. There are so many reversible errors in that case. But the biggest problem right now is the Supreme Court's presidential immunity decision back in June, where the Supreme Court held not only does the president can't face criminal prosecution, just like he can't face civil prosecution from the
Right.
Nixon case 40 years ago for his official acts, not his personal acts, his official acts. You can't charge a president for his official acts. You also cannot use evidence that's subject to presidential immunity. And they did that in this case, both before the grand jury and at trial, where they took evidence from President Trump's deputy chief of staff for communications, Hope Hicks,
Right.
along with his deputy chief of staff for operations, Madeline. Those are two key pieces of evidence that they relied upon heavily in this case that makes Judge Juan Merchan, this corrupt judge who should have recused because his daughter, Laura Merchan, is making money off this case and works for Kamala Harris's campaign, that he has to declare a mistrial in this case. And if he doesn't, I think this will get to the Supreme Court of the United States very quickly, and they'll step in and stop this.
Reviving misdemeanors, making them felonies, tying the felonies to something that we have no idea what they tied it to for federal elections law. The FEC said there was nothing. Matthew Colangelo, leaving his job, the third in line to be the AG, suddenly shows up in the office. There is so much wrong with this case. That's not even mentioning Merchan and his corrupt daughter. So at the end of the day, just very quickly, before this so-called final justice sometime in November, can the appeals court hear it, or that's way too fast? It would be next year before it can be appealed.
I think that it's going to be too far off. Look, this is what's going to happen. I just put out a Substack piece on this today. The election on November 5th will determine President Trump's legal fate. If President Trump wins, there is a very good shot this all goes away. If he loses, these Democrats will try to put President Trump in prison for the rest of his life and bankrupt him.
It is Mike Davis, MRDDMIA, over on X. Go follow everything he does there. Go check out his Substack as well. He just mentioned that. Go to Truth and you can follow him there. And go to the Article 3 Project website, article3project.org, and it's the number 3. When we talk about Jack Smith, what was it? I don't know that we spoke since this happened, but his case was basically thrown out from top to bottom, and then he decides to charge again? Did he change what he was charging the president on, or did he try to just reapply the same charges?
So there are 4. So he has 2 cases against President Trump, which is just unprecedented that federal prosecutors are bringing 2 different sets of charges against the same defendant in 2 venues. And the only reason Jack Smith is doing that is that Trump actually got lucky and drew a fair judge in the Southern District of Florida with Judge Eileen Cannon. So Jack Smith did this unprecedented move of charging Trump again in D.C. for January 6th. Any prosecutor worth their salt will tell you this is totally irregular, totally bogus. But with the 4 counts in D.C., the Supreme Court made 2 rulings that are critical. And back in June, first it was the Fisher decision on the post-Enron obstruction of justice statute intended for corporate fraud that the Biden Kamala Justice Department has contorted, politicized, and weaponized to go after Trump and his supporters on January 6th. The Supreme Court in the Fisher case threw out those charges for the January 6th defendants, but Jack Smith has 4 counts in D.C. 2 of them relate to the Fisher case, and Jack Smith is just going to ignore the Fisher decision and say, oh, that Fisher decision has different application. It doesn't apply to Trump. Apparently, there's a Trump derangement syndrome exception to the Fisher decision by the Supreme Court. And of course, D.C. Obama Judge Tanya Chutkan, this radical Marxist, is going to go along with this to interfere in the election. They're also largely ignoring the presidential immunity decision because they're putting back in there almost everything that was in before, except for they're taking out the Justice Department stuff. They're still including Trump's conversations with his vice president, Mike Pence, that the Supreme Court held was presumptively immune.
It is Mike Davis. Mike, you know what I found out a lot from you over the years now and from all these cases is that there seems to be checks and balances only for one side. And I can't see any checks and balances at all for judges. These judges seem to have free reign. What is the legal mechanism we have in the United States to make sure a judge is doing his or her job in an unbiased, even-handed way? Is there anything?
Yeah, it's called impeachment and removal from office. It's called Congress can use the power of the purse to defund them. What D.C. Obama Judge Chutkan is doing is an abomination. She got slapped down by the Supreme Court of the United States in the presidential immunity decision in June. It was a 6-3 decision. It should have been 9-0, but the 3 liberal women on the Supreme Court are partisan hacks. You have the Chief Justice, John Roberts, certainly no Trump supporter.
Yeah.
No Trump signs in his yard in Chevy Chase. No MAGA hat that he wears around the Supreme Court. Even the Chief Justice John Roberts smacked down D.C. Obama Judge Tanya Chutkan for railroading Trump and rushing this case too quickly, because the Chief Justice understands correctly this case is so much bigger than Trump or one presidential election. If you can destroy the presidency, you will destroy our country. And D.C. Obama Judge Tanya Chutkan has just ignored what the Chief Justice wrote in that decision back in June. She should be impeached and removed from the bench. She let Jack Smith go out of order and put on a one-sided political show trial through pleadings before the election, instead of having Trump file a motion to dismiss to dismiss the indictment. Chutkan let Jack Smith go first because she knew that Jack Smith was not going to be able to respond before the election. It was a blatant play to interfere in the election. She is a shameful judge.
It's Mike Davis. He's not shameful. Go to article3project.org right now. Go follow him, MRDDMIA, over on social media. Maybe about 30 seconds or a minute on this, Mike. We've already talked about how you absolutely have the constitutional right as a free American to question the results of an election. That's always been the way it is. Suddenly we're pretending like you can't do that. But what do you make of Jamie Raskin, who was caught on video, and he knew that he was being videoed, telling law students, if Trump should win, we won't seat him. We'll stop him because of the third section of the 14th Amendment. And of course, he's talking about insurrection, that nobody's been charged with insurrection. So here's the guy already saying, we will not allow the peaceful transfer of power should he win. What do you make of that?
Didn't they just charge President Trump for that? Doesn't he face charges in Fulton County, Georgia, and in D.C. under Jack Smith and Tanya Chutkan for objecting to the last election? I mean, that is absolutely insane that he's saying that even if Trump is clearly the winner, there's no doubt as to Trump being the winner, he's still going to deny Trump being put back in the White House.
He's pre-denying it. He's pre-denial right now.
Yeah, it's absolutely insane. The Supreme Court ruled very clearly in the Colorado case, 9-0, that you could not use Section 3 of the 14th Amendment the way that Raskin is saying that they're going to try to use it in this case. Congress has to pass a federal insurrection criminal statute, which Congress has done. You have to bring federal criminal charges for insurrection. The jury has to unanimously find guilt with evidence beyond a reasonable doubt.
Right.
And then the judge has to convict. Then and only then can you disqualify under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. And that is very clear, going all the way back to the Griffin's case from 1869, I believe it was. The Supreme Court made that very clear. In the Colorado case, 9-0. So if Jamie Raskin, look, I would say this to Jamie Raskin and these Democrats, try it and see what happens. See what actually happens if you try to deny Trump his win, if you try to deny the will of the American people after November 5th, when President Trump beats Kamala Harris like a drum.
And by the way, if Jamie Raskin is not in the majority, he can't do what he's saying anyway. If he is in the majority, he can try it, as you said, but nobody's been charged with insurrection, so it would be absolutely ridiculous. But this is the same guy that's been challenging the results of elections for many, many years now, including the election of Donald Trump. I believe that he was objecting to some delegates, maybe from Florida, and he's not from Florida. So Jamie Raskin is that nut job anyway, so he has no chance, is what you're saying.
Well, I mean, so look, they've reformed the Electoral Count Act of 1887, so it makes it a higher threshold to object. But I would say this to the American voters. We need to turn out in droves and vote as early as possible. Bank your vote. Do not wait till Election Day to vote. You need to make sure that there's not a Hamas riot or another disastrous Kamala response to a hurricane that will prevent you from voting. Vote as early as possible, swamp the vote, and so there is zero chance that Democrats can steal this election from us again.
Great advice from Mike Davis, founder, president, Article 3 Project, article3project.org. Go follow him on social media as well. Mike, thanks for the knowledge as always. I appreciate you.
Thank you, sir.
All right, brother. We're back after this. Stay right here.